Hello there, and welcome to our latest episode of Obscurama. I am your host, horror filmmaker Lawrie Brewster, director of such films as Lord of Tears, The Unkindness of Ravens, and many others. I am joined by a wonderful crew who will be lending us some interesting factoids during a discussion about the films of Sergio Leone. They include Michael Brewster behind camera and Tom Staunton, who will, during the course of our film discussion, be producing a wonderful illustrated sketch. I am also delighted to introduce to you all a wonderful, talented 23-year-old filmmaking lady who has just had her first ever appointment with the dentist. So how did that go? And did you get a lollipop?
What? I think someone's projecting here because actually Lawrie had his first ever appointment with the dentist.
I did. Recently COVID has caused for some delays, and although you're all watching with excitement about the thoughts of this wonderful talented young lady over the works of Sergio Leone, it's important to also let you know that I did get a filling and it was too large. So now it feels like I have a marble stuck inside my head. So, Megan Tremethick, you are the star of Dragon Knight, a recent Hex Studios fantasy film, but you're also a writer and a film director, and you have just finished filming on Slot, a short film which will be part of one of our exciting anthology feature films in development as well. When I ask you about Sergio Leone, it really is to me in a context that, at least as I see it, that many younger folks aren't as interested or familiar in the works of older films. You know, it takes more effort. And so it's quite extraordinary that you have embarked on a cinematic marathon to watch the full works of Sergio Leone, at least from his international hit, A Fistful of Dollars, and to his last big international release, Once Upon a Time in America.
Yeah.
So this epic chat with lots of powerful jokes and awkward interactions will see us travel through 6 entire films and the career of a very important filmmaker who is the favourite director of one of your preferred directors, Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah.
So, I guess, without further ado, we could start with our first film.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Which is A Fistful of Dollars, and this is an adaptation of Akira Kurosawa's samurai action film Yojimbo, transported to the West, and was released in 1964. If I'm wrong about any of these things, but please correct me in the comments below so I can delete them with satisfaction and relish. Starring Clint Eastwood, his first major film, which is a far cry from his TV series that he was in the States, which was a comedy series, and also co-stars Gian Maria Valente.
Yeah, the amazing villain.
This is also your handwriting as well, which is
Rude!
Cryptic. You know, my old man eyes can't barely see it, but yeah, Gran Maria.
My cultish handwriting.
Who plays Ramon, the villain of Fistful of Dollars.
Yeah.
And Mariana Koch that plays Mansell, a damsel.
Marisol, yeah.
Yes, that is that is. So, first of all, as a 23-year-old woman,
Indeed.
what was it like? Was it strange?
All of his films, well, obviously, yeah, it is quite the marathon because they feel like novels in terms of just how much ground is covered in each film. And yeah, like they're just so different to what is made nowadays, even in terms of action films, because of like, particularly the first three, well, they all have so much heart, but for action films, the first three have an incredible amount of heart, and Clint Eastwood just has such incredible charisma that I feel like a lot of modern day action heroes just wouldn't be allowed to have. because it would be kind of considered a weakness. I feel like Clint Eastwood has a vulnerability in his performance, like in those three, that a lot of male action heroes they're not allowed to have.
So, I can only assume that everyone watching this knows the basic storylines for these films. And to come back to your point, Fistful of Dollars, Clint Eastwood plays Joe, who turns up in a town that is run by two rival gangs, and as a kind of mercenary, he plays off the gangs against one another to ultimately triumph. And the main villain of that film being the charismatic criminal known as Ramon. Like, he's actually, I think he's pretty damn sexy and charismatic.
Yeah.
And as the villain in both these films, with amazing pathos as well.
Yeah. So good that they asked him back.
Yeah.
To play a different character in the next film, which I think is also quite unusual.
It is indeed.
Like in the same kind of universe of this Western town, like to have him come back as a different person.
So if we focus on this first film then, and speaking about the cast, then how did you find Clint Eastwood? Or rather, what did you think of Clint Eastwood? In case that Scottish expression of how did you find him makes it sound like you found him in a mountain.
Whoa! Yeah, not that day. I just found him. He had a charisma and he seemed like quite a sweet man. Which he had a toughness, but it seemed very effortless. I think nowadays, like a lot of, maybe not so much now, but maybe like in the 2000s and 2010s, all those kind of action films, everyone had to be super macho, but I feel like he kind of exudes confidence and like a strength, but he isn't trying too hard.
Right, so he has a kind of
An
effortless
charisma. Yeah.
And of course he also has a kind of heart of gold as well, because in the course of the story he liberates a woman that is being held prisoner by Ramon, the criminal gang leader that's obsessed with her and using her as a hostage as well.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously he's not perfect. You know, he is a criminal too. He's a bounty hunter, but like he has, like a real kind of a genuine heart of kindness at the same time. But it's kind of what I like about all of the films is no character is completely clean. They all have done things, but it's just more like he is the protagonist because he has the most morals. He does so much with what he doesn't say, like with his eyes, his expressions, like Sergio Leone or his DOPs love kind of close-ups of faces, and I feel like he has so much going on behind his eyes, and all the characters do, really, but I feel like that is so important, and also it's just good to play an action hero that is effortless, because I feel like the audience are gonna kind of relate to that kind of character and just like them a lot more.
Do you feel in present pop culture that there is too much of a try-hard coolness?
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah. Again, obviously I don't know what Clint Eastwood is like in real life, but it just felt completely natural what he was doing. Like his performance, it didn't feel forced at all.
Do you feel there's the opportunity to play characters like his for women, such as yourself?
I mean, I would like to create opportunities where I could play those kind of roles, or other people could.
Could make movies.
Yeah,
Sure,
exactly.
okay.
What a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that's always available to artists. You know, we have that freedom to create art and not just look at the culture and be like,
But again, we were kind of talking about how a lot of female action heroes kind of have to put the male protagonist in their place. And again, that feels like, I feel like Clint Eastwood's character wouldn't need to do that because he has so much confidence and he is such a secure character. He wouldn't do something like that. I feel like
to engage in emasculative behavior.
Yeah, a little bit, which is just a shame.
Yeah, because a dose of emasculation is a great way to add a bit of sass, but
which can be cool, but it depends how it's done.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't speak as loudly as an action.
Yeah.
Though, and sometimes I guess that's to do with the dramatic motivation as well. So, a heroine can defeat one guy physically, in a way that's more dramatically satisfying than 100 guys if it's done implausibly.
Yeah.
And can beat a guy with a stare over a monologue that's emasculative or maybe kind of juvenile.
Absolutely.
You know.
And the less that is said in terms of like monologues, like Clint Eastwood's character, there's so much mystery to him, and I think that's really important because personally, like obviously it's good to have a good payoff in a film, but I like films that do leave room for your imagination so you can kind of go away and think about it and ask questions a bit more about that character, say. And another thing with the action of, all the three films feel so convincing. Like all of his like violence, action scenes in all of Sergio Leone's films feel pretty legit, and a lot of action films feel a little bit like video games.
One particular scene I really like from that film is the one in which Clint Eastwood's character, Joe, confronts a group of gang members who have just fired shots at the hooves of his mule as he's going past.
Oh, yeah.
And it skids the horse and it runs, you know, panics, and then he goes back and confronts them, telling them he didn't mind them having fun, but that his horse is really upset and that he needs them to apologise to the horse. And then at first the bad guys are laughing, but then they just look back at him and he's just serious, like staring at them, you know, with his fingers poised for the grip of his pistol.
Oh my God, I love that.
And you have the suspense sound, the music building, and the pause, just looking between the close-ups. And then in a flurry, in a second, it's over. Much like the action scenes in the samurai films of Akira Kurosawa, where that build-up is unleashed in a torrent. That is probably my favourite scene.
Nice.
Although a lot of people like the scene as well where, you know, Joe has secretly placed a metal plate on his chest and he's telling Ramon to aim for the heart.
Oh yeah, no, that bit is so cool.
Until he runs out of his ammunition and he throws it. That dark humour is a great element, I think, of Sergio Leone's work. Did you have a favourite scene, or was that any of your favourite scenes?
Actually, the plate bit is really awesome. And I think just, you're right about the humour, actually. They have like cool action lines and so many cool action moments with no dialogue needed, and I think it's so much better to have just no dialogue with action, because I think you pay a lot more attention, and then he'll place his lines perfectly. But I love the kind of like dark sense of humour that kind of runs throughout all of his films, really, even in some of the really, really tragic ones later on, which have a lot to say. They're still funny at times, and I think like people feel more with a hard hit of reality when they kind of aren't expecting it, because there are humorous moments in places, rather than a film that has no humour at all because it's just trying to. Do you get what I mean? Like,
yes,
yeah.
So, do you feel there's something that younger filmmakers and actors could learn from this particular film?
I would say...
Not necessarily what would be learned, but just if there are things to be...
Oh, definitely.
Really,
yeah, there's loads of things, even just how to make the score work so well.
Which, of course,
there are so many things.
Ennio Morricone, his great collaborating partner. Did you enjoy the music?
God, the music's my favourite bit out of all the films. I mean, obviously, the messages are amazing of the later films, and the earlier films, which don't have such a strong message, are still so cool. But I feel like the music is just the most like magical part, and it really transports you.
And I think Sergio Leone approached music as a very important high priority. Ennio Morricone was a classmate of his at school, and often when they were shooting scenes, they would play Ennio Morricone's music. Yeah. And I think that would be great for the performers, especially if they were utilising very physical performances without dialogue. Yeah. Then they could allow themselves to be swept up in the music and embody the drama subconsciously in their physical form.
Yeah. As an actor, I would love to do that sometime, and even just thinking about it as a filmmaker, like imagine how perfect that would be, because every shot could be tailored to your soundtrack, to your score, because it was meant for it.
So, A Fistful of Dollars is released in 1964, and the film is an unexpected major hit in the United States, and it attracted a fair amount of criticism from critics in the West for its non-romantic depiction of the Wild West in the United States. Critics saw it as violent, nihilistic, and cruel compared to the more family-orientated stories of the West, which isn't to say that there weren't great, darker Westerns in the American tradition, but just that they were a minority compared to what had become more popular, which would be the Wild West as shown in daytime television that kids could watch with their mother or their father. So and here comes this thing that takes all that and perverts it, in their eyes at least, by making it violent and horrific. And to make matters worse, taking one of the TV stars from the US associated with Wild West comedy and then making him into this cynical mercenary.
Yeah.
So we could move on to our next film in the great
Epic.
Epic, yes, marathon. We go to 1965 to the release of A Few Dollars More, another Western, and Clint Eastwood reprises the character of Joe, and this time he's joined by, at first a rival and then ally, Colonel Mortimer, played by venerable action star, or even at that time, Lee Van Cleef. And again, we have Gran Maria Volante, as he is known, the Indian, leader of a vicious gang. And again, like the first film, he is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
I just love him. I know it sounds ridiculous, I can't pronounce his name correctly, but I absolutely love him. The pathos, he's a very beautiful man, gorgeous eyes, and mesmerising, brilliant, charismatic villain.
Someone's got a crush.
And we also have Klaus Kinski as well, the exceptional collaborator of Werner von Herzog. Werner Herzog. Thank you, Tom. Dressed up with a hunchback. Effectively a cameo, really. But
he was great.
Yeah. And like the first film as well, many of the bad guys, or the extras you could call them, or supporting cast, they're back. If they died, doesn't matter. They're back. They're all back, and they're still in his gang.
Yeah, cool.
They've just made it a little bit bigger. So we're in 1965. We have our cast, and again, they're amazing. Lee Van Cleef at this time was suffering. His career was suffering. He'd been suffering from alcoholism for some time, and he was struggling to get work in the United States. He was becoming difficult to insure. For this Italian production, it was perfect. They could take a risk on him and get him for cheap, effectively. But what a fantastic role for him.
It was.
And he, to me, produced a beautiful performance.
Absolutely. No, like, in terms of his performance, like, compared to the next film, this one was my favourite for him. I feel like it suited him so well. He had, again, great charisma, and he just worked so well with
Clint Eastwood?
Yeah, how the hell did I forget Clint Eastwood's name? But yeah, they just went so well together. They had great chemistry.
It's just, you'll get confused because he's an older name. It's like other old things, like telephone.
Yeah, no, shut up.
Horse, these things.
Horse? Oh, were they riding horses back when you were young?
Yeah, pretty much. Pulling coal wagons is a hard life. In the story, we're following Joe almost directly from A Fistful of Dollars, continuing his career as a kind of mercenary, except now he is a bounty hunter as well. And Colonel Mortimer, played by Lee Van Cleef, is also a bounty hunter, but they come from very different backgrounds. Colonel Mortimer comes from an army background, and he is dressed quite quite conservatively, elegantly almost. He's refined, and his weaponry is refined.
It's a great costume. It looks really cool.
I mean, the art direction on all his films show meticulous care. Even the lowest budget films of these three spaghetti westerns, especially the first as well. It's amazing they can manage it. So these two men are forced to work together to try and bring down the Indian and his gang, first by infiltrating them and then fighting from the inside. And as the heist goes wrong and there's a whole pile of betrayals and double betrayals and triple crossings, our two heroes are straight in the middle of all the action.
Yeah.
And we also have, for the first time, a much deeper emotional subplot. In A Fistful of Dollars, we have a damsel in distress and our good-natured hero frees her. But this time, we have a tragic backstory where Colonel Mortimer has a sister who committed suicide during her attempted rape by the character of the Indian. And the preservation of the pocket watch from that was taken from her husband who's killed is something that that her brother has as a kind of a copy of, as a momentum. And of course, in that final confrontation that Colonel Mortimer has with the Indian, they both produce their pocket watches, you know.
That's a great
and then Clint Eastwood has his own, sorry, Dead Together, But we're seeing Sergio Leone going into uncomfortable emotional territory. Tiptoeing, he's getting toe deep, you know, but as each film goes on, the emotional drama becomes a larger and larger aspect of his films. So what did you think of A Few Dollars More in general?
I think in terms of, like, in comparison with the first one, this one, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, out of those three, because they kind of feel like, they're the trilogy, I think A Few Dollars More was probably my favorite out of those. I just loved the banter, particularly with the two characters, with Levi and Cleve. Yeah, the bromance was amazing. I loved it. But also that flashback scene, you know, like in the bedroom with the locket, it was just really, it was intense and kind of tragic as well. Like, it was a nice blend for an action.
Disturbing for me as well. Almost like the kind of creepy flashbacks you might see in the films of Dario Argento.
Yeah, I actually feel like a lot of Sergio Leone's flashbacks feel like Dario Argento style flashbacks because they're quite long and uncomfortable and not a lot is said and it's just subtle.
Again, correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but Dario Argento is in some respects a prodigy of Sergio Leone. He worked on some of his films with him being younger than Sergio Leone, and it's quite possible that, I mean, given that they both very heavily use flashbacks to great romantic, emotional, dramatic effect, and I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, it makes sense, for sure.
I love the bromance in A Few Dollars More, and it's one of the reasons I've found that film so entertaining, and I've seen it many, many times because you have this great feel-good factor of watching these two characters share that journey together.
No, it's a really rewatchable film. I feel like that is the film I feel like I could watch that loads of times more. But then I feel like all of his films, there's so much going on and there's such a long journey, and I feel like it's easy to miss things in his films. So all of his films, I feel like the more you watch them, the better they'll get.
Okay, well, yeah, I could agree with that. I mean, sure.
Yeah.
For favourite scenes, there are a few of them for me. I'd love to hear what your favourite scene is in A Few Dollars More.
I feel like the flashback, again, it's not my favourite. I feel like those flashbacks that are, they're memorable, so I don't want to say that's my favourite scene because it's pretty horrible. But those kind of scenes just stay with you more, you know?
One of mine is when Levi and Cleve strikes his match on Klaus Kinski's head.
Oh, yeah.
to light his pipe.
That's pretty cool.
When you think of a way to create a strong presence among a bunch of criminals, hardened criminals, and going up to probably one of the toughest, creepiest ones, and then you use the sweaty back of his head to strike a match and then smile smugly at him as he turns around with outrage.
It's pretty, big balls.
And he blows out the match. You look at it and you take another
Yeah.
and then strike up again. Doubling the insult. And Klaus Kinski was such a maniac in real life that fury in his eyes is just powerful with Lee Van Cleef just damming his pipe.
Yeah, he's terrifying. He has such a presence.
Which makes it all the more funny when that genuine presence and rage and creepiness is so it's amusingly challenged with this attempt by Lee Van Cleef's character to provoke him.
Yeah.
That is one of my favourite scenes. It has that kind of humour and the action.
Yeah.
Your favourite scene, of course, is the horrifying rape flashback. So that's
It's
interesting.
memorable.
I like
it's
the
not
funny
like
one,
my.
and you're like,
They just stick out to me as good moments of cinema. Okay, it's not.
no, it is absolutely.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the finale with the with Mortimer Shissy and the Indian facing off with one another?
Oh, that's pretty.
And then Clint Eastwood arriving kind of magically with the next watch.
I feel like all of the finales in all the films have this kind of really nice slow pace, and it just builds the tension, and they kind of always have an awesome payoff. And actually, I feel like they're often stood in triangles and things. He has a really interesting blocking that just it makes it look really, really satisfying. I love all the finales, to be fair.
So yeah, so you really liked A Few Dollars More then.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Then only 1 year later, so incredibly,
Wow.
these first three, very successful international films are made to 1 year and 1 year. Then we get to what is considered, and it's interesting, Sergio Leone has made, of those 6 films that were big hits, he did, I think, 1 or 2 before that, a documentary and The Colossus of Rhodes, which was a kind of a higher gig. But of those that were big, there are a number of different films that folks consider to be his greatest masterpiece. And wouldn't it be amazing to have made 6 films where people argue which of your 6 is the masterpiece?
Goals.
Not whether they are masterpieces, but just which is the greatest
is the biggest?
masterpiece. Yeah.
Jeez.
And for many, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly is for many considered to be their favourite. And of course, many of the films we're talking afterwards will also be considered by many to be their favourite.
Yeah.
So we're in 1966. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly gets a heap more cash to get made, but it's still, as far as I understand, produced in Italy predominantly. We're not in America yet. We have Clint Eastwood. He's back.
Yeah.
This time referred to as Blondie.
Yeah.
And we also have Eli Wallach. I think it's, one of the greatest gifts of being a Scotsman is our ability to mispronounce every name of every nation in the world.
That's just your ability.
Oh, great. He plays Tuco, which is the ugly in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Unfortunately for Eli, of course, Blondie plays the good, and the bad is played by Lee Van Cleef again. Now, they're pretty much the main cast, really. We do have good, strong supporting roles that come in and out, but this is a road movie. We're not in a town this time. And the first 2 films are more single located. Sure, we see some travelling on horses, but they'll end up somewhere after a transition, and then that's where everything. But this, they are on the road. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a story that follows 3 different, very dangerous fighters in the West who are on a mission to retrieve a cache of hidden gold. And this cache is in the grave, an unmarked grave of a soldier that only Blondie knows the name of. And Tuco, Eli Wallach, will know, I'm about to get a pronunciation correction here. I can see it in your eyes, Tom.
I would say Wallach.
Wallach, or Eli Wallach.
Wallach.
Knows the site of the grave. So one knows the name, one knows the graveyard. And they're not going to tell each other until they get there. But Lee Van Cleef's character known as Angel Eyes, is also hot on the pursuit. And during the course of them getting to that graveyard, they have various interactions with one another. Fights, deserts, and emotional reunions with, for example, Eli Wallach's character Tuco meeting his brother in a monastery, to a POW camp, as the film is set during the American Civil War, and just lots of things. And their characters' lives are intertwined with the war. In this case, the US Civil War plays a large part in the kind of energy of the film. Especially when we reach the finales as well.
Yeah, it's kind of always looming in the background, but it kind of comes closer and closer, I guess, to their story and
That's
their
right.
lives.
We have powerful scenes in the POW war camp where Angel Eyes has assumed the role of a Union Army officer torturing Confederate prisoners to get information that will help him identify eventually Tuco and Blondie, who have dressed up as Confederate soldiers in an attempt to get to where they're going as well. Both sides are using the war to try and get the gold, but our heroes eventually they start to soften up along the way. And as the film tries to make us more apparent or make us more cognizant of the tragedy of that war, our heroes are seen emotionally responding to it and changing as characters, especially Blondie, with a great scene at the end, which I'll come back to as it's my favourite scene.
Yeah, it's epic.
But with a finale, in any case, that involves Eli Wallach running through a grave with thousands and thousands of war dead, trying to find the gold. So interesting subtext is going on here, as well as great drama and action.
Yeah. No, there's so much going on, and again, like, is it Eli Wallach? Yeah, him and Clint Eastwood are amazing together as well. Like, I feel like Clint Eastwood must be just a really good actor to work. Well, obviously, but I don't know. I feel like he just.
When he shouts, "You're a son of 1,000 fathers," that's a son of 1,000 fathers.
But like, it's just funny how brutal they are to each other, and I totally feel it. Like, and even though Clint Eastwood does something terrible to him, but when he's left out in the desert for a really long time, like, it feels brutal. Like, I don't know how long those scenes in the desert last, but when Clint Eastwood is just kind of like making his way through and his face is getting more like, it's so brutal, and like that scene kind of just stuck with me as like, cringe. That sounds painful.
That is is an incredible scene.
Yeah.
So Blondie pays the price for betraying Tuco.
Yeah.
And Tuco effectively catches him and takes him out into the middle of nowhere and leaves him to die.
Which essentially he did as well to him. It's just we didn't see as much of it that time.
The imminent demise of Blondie is interrupted by the unexpected arrival of a horse coach, where the drivers and passengers are dead or dying from an ambush. And this is actually our introduction to the war backdrop. We don't see that before. It's just the town and the game that Blondie and Tuco are playing, where where Blondie pretends to capture Tuco, he's about to get hanged, and then he shoots the rope and they get off and they take the reward money and split it. And so at first it has the fun of the first two films.
Yeah.
The break into that occurs at that moment where we're talking about, where Blondie has been tortured and he looks mutilated from the sun. So it's already darker and stranger, and we're also seeing our hero at his weakest
and
since
not
any of the
glamorous.
films. But then this new thing comes in, and so you see it, and it's a beautiful shot of the horse coach being driven. The horses are just wild, they're out of control. There's no rider disciplining them, and we linger on it with this beautiful Ennio Morricone score, which will be reprised at various times during the film, that has a kind of martial theme to it, a military kind of theme. Although it's like it's like an honor song that might be played in memoriam, to soldiers at a funeral, this kind of thing. And it just is incredible type of cinematography. It's almost hair-raising. But that is the moment that our two heroes will be forced to work together again after one of the dying passengers is able to give each of them a piece of the puzzle.
I love that scene, actually. I think that is definitely one of my favorite scenes from that film, because it's funny, but it's also really tense, and you're just like, because they hate each other. But then all of a sudden, once he knows that Clint Eastwood has the actual name, he's like, oh, my friend. It's amazing.
It's really well done. And you have Eli Wallach looking after him in the hospital as well, like bringing in things.
It's so funny.
It's interesting. Sergio Leone has a sympathy for those characters, especially his Mexican characters, or those that are clearly come from a background of greatest poverty.
Yeah.
They
have the best sense of humor.
They do. And I think Eli Wallach does that beautifully. They have a scene during Blondie's recovery in the hospital where Eli Wallach meets his brother, who is is a monk who runs the hospital, and they have an exchange, which is kind of it doesn't go well for Eli. We learn that he left his family, didn't help them, everything like that, and he's kind of despised by his brother. They love each other, hate each other, but it's bad for Eli.
Yeah.
When he goes out, and we think, he's just pissed off and angry. He then goes on to explain to Blondie how much his brother loves him and how much he loves him and everything. And it's like, and he knows because he overheard it, that wasn't how it went down.
It's complete denial, or just lies.
And it's a wonderful expression of that other side of the tragic side of Eli Wallach's character.
Yeah.
He is a bandit, but it was either that or the life of a monk. That is a kind of slightly kind of left-wing explanation, a social conscience that is trying to give Eli Wallach's character, so that we don't just think of him as just a foul-mouthed bandit.
Right.
It's like, no, there's more to him. He is the product of a tough life and an unfair life.
Yeah.
That, by his words, are something that all the folks in his village and towns had to kind of live by.
No, that's so true.
So it's good, because in a way, his character would maybe be like the funny one.
Yeah, the comic relief that's
like,
a bit archetypal, but obviously not like Sergio Leone. It wasn't going to have any archetypal characters.
Yeah.
No.
And I think all these things, though, are new features of Sergio Leone's films compared to the two that come before. Like, we've got social conscience, we have the backdrop of this war, and we're starting to see, like, atrocity and things. Tell me then about any of your favourite scenes then from The Good, the Bad and Ugly.
Well, definitely the desert, like I said. And just how it completely turns and has the humour, but it also has the kind of tragedy before it. And the graveyard scene at the end is just amazing.
What's the graveyard scene? Is that when...
So when, he's running, like trying to find the grave, but then it goes into the standoff. Like, that's so cool. Yeah,
that's the famous scene where Eli Wallach is running through thousands and thousands of graves.
Yeah, with the beautiful music.
Yep. That kind of completes the circle for this metaphorical backstory where the war is being used. You've seen everyone dying in the battles. Like this fighting, there's bodies everywhere in the film. As they get closer and closer, there's more and more dead bodies until eventually you're left with the most bodies of all.
The aftermath.
And they're underground.
Yeah.
It is a tragic thing. It's saying something about the tragedy of war. You have the scene before that where they're at the bridge, which could even draw some parallels with things like, at the time, maybe the forthcoming or imminent US Vietnam War and things like that. Just this idea of disillusionment, like why are we fighting, what we're fighting for, it's all futile.
Yeah.
You have the Union captain who's like, we can't destroy this bridge, the other side can't destroy this bridge, so we all just charge across it and kill each other and then run back again every day.
Wow.
Until, and he's drunk all the time, so everything's broken down. And during one of those battles, the captain gets injured. So he's dying, effectively, he's going to die.
Yeah.
And he hates that bridge, and he just looks at it after he's been explaining to Tuco and Blondie how much he hates it. You know, if only someone could just destroy that bridge, you know. And their heroes decide they need to get over that bridge, and they need both sides to go away, so they want to destroy it, so they'll bum off. But they're also doing it for the captain, you know, because when they go off to do it, Blondie says to him, "Keep your eyes looking over there," and you can have this beautiful moment where when the captain finally succumbs to his wounds and dies, he's able to do it watching the bridge explode.
Yeah.
You know? But then what is the victory in that? The victory is simply in that they have respite from killing each other for this stupid reason. You know, the war goes on, but Sergio Leone is trying to effectively say the victory in that scene is the war has been paused for a moment.
Yeah,
the
and
killing's
lives
been
have
paused.
been
It's got a kind of anti-war sentiment.
Yeah.
With the fixation on torture, prisoners, and abuse, massacres, and graves of tens of thousands. We're not glorifying war. It's a kind of anti-war film.
Yeah.
In which these characters are fighting their way through a storm,
Yeah.
you know, to try and get an escape, you know, that the money might give them.
Yeah, I feel like that fits with a lot of the other films that are more political. They're always kind of questioning, like, why are you doing this? Why are we doing this? And yeah, he's a very romantic filmmaker in the way he shoots things, but he never really romanticizes violence, other than maybe the earlier films when Clint Eastwood looks cool, you know, like shooting people. But the more political, the more he develops, and the more brutal and gritty and not romantic at all the violence becomes.
Yeah, so a great movie, right?
Yeah.
How did you feel about Lee Van Cleef's performance between A Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad and Ugly?
Yeah, Angel Eyes. I mean, he's such a talented actor, and both were amazing, and I feel like he made them very different, which was really awesome. I think it's harder to judge because I think he was in A Few Dollars More he had a lot more screen time than The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, or at least that's how it feels. It feels like for the shorter scenes that he had, the less screen time, I think he was fantastic, but I loved him kind of, the two like rogues, Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef in A Few Dollars More. I feel like that's definitely my favorite.
You have, to say in the parlance of your generation, shipped them. That's Tom coughing in dramatic shock at the term shipping.
Shipping.
Have you shipped them?
Well, I certainly am now.
Easter eggs, canon, all that kind of stuff, which is really a big part of modern films now.
Yeah.
People obsess over the little details, and they're thrown like, you know, crumbs of bread for people to scrape around the dirt like animals for. You know. But sometimes it's done right, and when it's done right, it's done modestly and simply and beautifully, because it is actually motivated by the story. In The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, we have Clint Eastwood's character of Joe playing this kind of bandit with a heart of gold. In The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, he's just a bandit at the start. He's not got that heart of gold, but it starts to creep in during his witnessing of the atrocities of the war and him basically getting a soft spot for the people around him. But it comes to a point, a magnificent point at the end of that film. So he's called Blondie, he's not called Joe. And he's dressed differently than we've seen him in the first two films. He's got a long coat on in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Finally, just as they're at the graveyard, he comes across a cavalry officer, a young boy, and he's dying. He's only moments away from death. and he looks at him, and that point of contact is personal for those characters. Clint Eastwood's character has changed. He's not the character he was at the start of the film. He takes off his coat and places it over the soldier, to keep him kind of warm as he dies. And he sits with him. I think he gives him a cigarette or a drink from his flask or something like that. He's caring for him in his final moments.
Yeah.
And he's just a kid, and he dies. And he can't bring himself to take his coat back off. He wants to leave it there with him. And so he takes something else that he just sees lying there, and it's the poncho. The great poncho that we recognize his character for the first 2 films. This shows us how he became the character in the first 2 films. And in modern pop culture, that's all that would matter. But when it's done right, the reason it matters is because he surrendered his coat to help a dying kid, because he changed as a man, as a character.
Yeah, it's a nice symbolization to just show that he has now changed.
Yeah, and that should be the only motivation for a so-called Easter egg or anything like that. And of course, I think you almost cheered, didn't you, when you saw him get his poncho?
Like, yay, the poncho!
It's like, yeah.
Yeah, because I think, I totally said, like, where's the poncho at the beginning?
Yeah.
So it was like
You're
a nice
watching
moment, but it doesn't feel like they've done it to appease the fans. It's completely motivated, like you said.
I think
it shows a character change, so it's perfect.
It's a beautiful scene, because you already love Clint Eastwood's character from the first 2 films, but to see him go from being kind of slight asshole to being that kind of warm-hearted anti-hero, it's a beautiful scene. I'll actually get mushed up every time I watch it, because I think it's beautifully done. Beautifully done. So one of the things that is definitely apparent in the first 3 films, though, is the lack of main characters for females.
Yeah.
We've got Sergio Leone. He has enjoyed utilizing different types of cultural characters, and different classes as well.
Yeah.
Though generally they're all pretty poor and in trouble.
Yeah.
But that's set to change now with the next film.
Yeah.
And that film is 1968, Once Upon a Time in the West. This is produced in the United States, which I'm sure I'm right about. It must be. And stars Henry Fonda as the villainous Frank.
Yeah.
We have no Clint Eastwood, and that can be a difficult thing for those who are just, because you want to see him in all Sergio Leone's films.
He's great.
But things have changed.
Yeah.
And Sergio Leone's life as well. In 1968, he's not wanting to do another Western, but he is getting no choice. The finance is only coming through on Westerns. The Yanks have decided this Italian kid knows what he's doing. They want to bring him over stateside, and they don't want him doing anything new. They want him making a Western with big American dollars and an American star. So they have Henry Fonda, they have Charles Bronson, who is, I think, Mexican, he is American, but he's like of Mexican descent, I think. I might be wrong. Again, just correct me in the comments, folks. But you're seeing Sergio Leone elevating the presence of these disadvantaged characters as he sees them, or the underdogs.
Yeah,
it might be.
Totally.
This time our hero is not even charismatic, but down in his luck, Caucasian bounty hunter.
Yeah.
But he is effectively a Mexican peasant. That we will learn has become a gunfighter with a very special purpose in mind for revenge, and a dab hand with the harmonica.
Yeah, that's such a nice, like, creative touch. It felt so, like, random at first, but it just really fits.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if we have effectively a Mexican peasant with a gun and a harmonica as one of our main characters, as our hero, and we also have a female lady person.
What?
Being one of the main characters, if not the main character, really.
Yeah,
I think this is her story.
Yeah.
And her name is
Jill.
The character's called Jill, and the actress is called.
Sorry.
Is it Claudia Cardinal?
Claudia Cardinal. Cardinal, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, my writing is awful.
I'm going to interrupt with a fact.
Ooh.
Oh.
Ooh.
Charles Bronson is entirely Lithuanian.
Oh. Wow.
Okay.
Yes, that has just saved me so many comments. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Great work, Tom.
Yeah.
And not to be confused with Robert Bronsky, who is a new action actor who has marketed himself as the reincarnation of Charles Bronson and looks almost identical to him. If you watch...
What you said about that? Yeah.
It's amazing. And
Wow.
Me and Michael, we met him in Cannes. He's an awesome guy and he loves Charles Bronson, hence he looks like Charles Bronson. And you can check out some of his low-budget movies and trailers on YouTube. It's lots of fun. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so we have Jill, we have Frank, played by Henry Fonda, the villain, and we have Harmonica Man, played by Charles Bronson.
Yeah.
And we also have Jason Robards, who plays a bearded bandit called Cheyenne as well. And there are a variety of strong supporting characters as well. So, quite a different feel from the first three Westerns.
Absolutely.
Before I elaborate on the story, what were your first impressions, what were your impressions of Once Upon a Time in the West?
Ooh, I feel like it started out really strong. I mean, all of Sergio Leone's films have very memorable kind of epic starting points. But yeah, the scene like when the family gets killed, it's really like cool when the bad guys come out, but then it's so brutal at the same time. It was a cool mix.
That is a spectacular scene.
Yeah.
So, what other things did you find? What were your first impressions as well?
It was interesting, like having a female protagonist. Like I really felt for her. I felt so sorry for her. And yeah, there was a particularly memorable scene which we'll probably talk about where she does what she has to do. But I just found myself really hating Frank. I feel like these characters were particularly fleshed out, and I had really strong emotions during this film.
Do you feel that this film was much more
melancholic?
Melancholic, sure.
Yeah.
And do you feel, in terms of drama and action film, that the scales were more heavily in the drama way, or do
Yeah, no, totally. Like the beginning had like a strong action moment, but yeah, no, a lot of the scenes that were the most memorable for me, other than that one, are the moments of drama and like you know the scene with when he like shoves the lamp.
Right across the saloon room.
That's amazing. But again, it's not always the action and the fighting in this film that stands out as much. It's the moments of drama. Yeah.
Okay, right. So,
in my opinion,
what is Once Upon a Time in the West? We have a story about a man out for revenge against a hired killer, a gunfighter. And you might think, well, that sounds like standard Western fare. But the difference with this story is that it's set against the setting sun of the Wild West era. And it doesn't resolve itself in the kind of same climactic, feel-good, cathartic action vibes of the earlier films. There is a sense, as this story goes on, that all the characters, the main principals, that are wed to the earlier era of the Wild West with its villains and action heroes, are all dying in their own way. That they are getting to the end of the railroad, which quite literally is the driver in this film, where it centres around Frank, our villain, as an aging villainous kind of gunfighter hired by the railroad barons to make sure that the railway can be constructed across farming lands without any interruption. Our greatest hero is killed in the first few minutes of the first 20 minutes of the film. Yeah. He is a family man that has carefully and scrutably invested in a tract of land that the railroad will knowingly come across. A tract of land where he has secretly discovered water that no one else knows, which will mean that his tract of land could become a town. And we are shown through very clever exposition, through objects in the house and things, that that was his dream in the form of toy buildings and trains and things like that. This dream to build a town and to build a family around that includes the arrival of our main character, Jill, who is a woman that he met in New Orleans. He treats her and respects her as a lady and has great affection for her, and they have secretly married in New Orleans, and she will be soon arriving, which in the earlier part of the film is why our family is preparing a wedding feast. Unfortunately, that wedding feast never happens because the family are massacred by the arrival of Frank and the gunman. In a spectacular
It's
scene.
amazing, yeah.
You know, where they walk out in formation in these dust coats with an incredible music from Ennio Morricone.
Yeah.
The kind of stuff that would give Quentin Tarantino an erection for 6 years.
And everyone else.
And everyone else.
Yeah.
And you have that wonderful tragic scene where the kid, it's only like a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old boy is looking up at Frank, and one of the henchmen says, "Hey Frank, what about the kid?" And Frank just turns and says, you know, like, why'd you have to say, well, why'd you do that? You know, like you said my name
Said
now.
his name.
Yes, why'd you do that? He doesn't have to explain it in detail to the audience, we know. And you see that 6-year come to the camera, kids looking at it, that's it. It's like, shit. Frank just shot a child in the face, you know. So, and it's not because he's the bad guy trying to rob a bank, it's because he is the advance guard, the vanguard of progress, a hired killer for a railway company, you know? So we're talking a different universe in this film. So Jill arrives, and effectively the film follows her attempts to try and build a life for herself and deciding whether to keep the land and try and help this dream come true or whether to sell. As soon as she inherits, she becomes a target for Frank and the railroad bosses that want that land for themselves. And standing in their way is Harmonica Man, who has his own secret revenge to plot against Frank, and Cheyenne, who is a bandit that leads a gang that Frank has been masquerading as with his henchmen, so that they, Cheyenne and his gang, would be the ones to get arrested whilst he goes about killing anyone standing in the railroad's path. So together, Jill, Harmonica Man, and Cheyenne end up facing off against Frank, his own henchmen, and the railroad bosses. And it's quite a violent saga.
Yeah, it is.
During the course of it, Frank is no fool. He wants a future for himself, you know, and he turns on the railroad bosses when he feels that the power of his gun is more than their dollars. And we think he's going to win doing that as well. But, you know, the relentless march of progress is a big theme to the film, and even he is beaten.
Yeah, being left behind.
Yeah. We have this incredible culmination of all these events where Frank and Harmonica Man eventually face off against one another. Frank realizes that there is no place for him in the future anymore. And effectively, he's decided to stop trying to become a rich businessman through working as a mercenary for the companies. He's like, tried business and failed, you know. And Harmonica Man says to him, "So you're not a businessman anymore?" Frank shakes his head, you know. And they have their final shootout. But it's not, and here's the thing, it opens up with this incredible operatic moment. Perhaps the most powerful flashback out, some could argue, in any of Sergio Leone's films, where we see that the reason Harmonica Man is Harmonica Man.
Yeah, the noose on the horse, yeah.
Totally. Harmonica Man, as a boy, is placed under his brother, who is tied on a noose dangling from a kind of stone arch. And if that kid, falls over, his brother dies. And who's watching him but a young Frank and his gang? Back in the old Wild West days, where, in the era that was expressed in the first two films of Sergio Leone. And in that crying boy's mouth, a harmonica is placed. And so we then learned that, since then, all those years passed, that little Mexican boy, as his character would be, learned to become an expert on the harmonica and the six-shooter so that he could one day get his revenge. But here's the thing, that revenge isn't decided in an amazing location, it's not like the other films where it's super romantic and done. No. This time they walk to the back of a barn where Jill's farm is, where all the guys are working on the railroad on the other side of the barn. They've not even stopped. No one's stopping for their final fight. It's between them, but the world doesn't care anymore. Everything's moved on.
Yeah.
It's like fighting at the back of a public toilets.
Yeah, or like in a back alley, kind of,
Instead of the middle of like the Roman Colosseum.
Yeah, like
which
the most
is
beautiful kind of, yeah.
It's like, no. So it's poignant and tragic. Cheyenne as well eventually succumbs to his injuries. His time is over as well. Frank's time is over, he gets killed. Harmonica Man says he might come back, but he goes off into the wastelands effectively to disappear.
Yeah, because it's not his time anymore.
But for Jill, it is her time.
Yeah.
We see her having grown from the advice of the characters around her and from her own strength, most of all, to rise from becoming, from being a prostitute, which we learn is what she is or was, absolutely, and even being a victim of all kinds of horrible stuff that we see, to eventually being the person driving the completion of the town. And you see her at the center of all these workmen and stuff like that, giving them water and encouraging them to keep working.
Yeah, that's a beautiful scene, actually. That's one of my favorite.
Can I ask you what you thought of the performances of Claudia as Jill?
Claudia as Jill. I just found myself really feeling for her, particularly like, I don't know, I hate the fact that she was a prostitute and she wants to have a new life, and like people like Frank are just reminding her, like in the brutal scene when he's basically kind of trying to rape her, but she's trying to go with it, and he's reminding her of what she was and kind of treating her as scum, and it's such a satisfying ending, kind of that she's filled with hope. But you said what do I think about her performance? I think she gave lots of pathos, and she kind of felt like a gothic heroine in a sense, which was really interesting.
Like Jane Eyre or something.
Yeah, which is interesting because you wouldn't associate that with, say, a prostitute. So it feels like she has moved on, and that's really interesting. I think she's a really interesting character, really. Like I don't know, it's a tricky
She's
one.
quite a tough character, isn't she?
She is tough because I think a lot of people would just say give in if they were being assaulted by someone, but she's smart because
She's streetwise. Some of her dialogue is really streetwise, and her interactions with the gangsters and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, she absolutely is. She kind of gives people what they want enough to survive because she knows she has to, and it's very realistic because that is what most people would do if they have the kind of streetwise like way of doing that.
They certainly show in her performance as well a vulnerable side as well as a strong side. We don't get a sense that this is an invincible character.
No, a lot happens to her during the film.
What did you feel about Henry Fonda's performance? He's someone that was associated with mainstream light entertainment,
right?
Not a terrifying killer. People scare easy when they're dying, is his famous quote.
Yeah, that's so brutal. I found myself kind of hating him, to be honest. Like, I mean, that means he did a really good job as the bad guy. yeah, no, particularly, yeah, just particularly how he treats Jill. I was just like, oh, you bastard.
So if you were to receive a 4 metre by 2 metre bedroom poster of Frank, you would be disappointed.
Yeah, that would be being sent back.
And even if it was a 12 metre by 4 metre poster,
Oh, well, maybe we could talk about that.
that would be quite impressive. People would ask questions.
They would, yeah.
What did you think of Charles Bronson? He's a man of few words.
Mm-hmm. That's
Harmonica
harmonica guy, yeah. I thought, like, he, again, had the kind of Clint Eastwood mystery about him, which was really nice. Like, he didn't need loads of dialogue. And I think characters like that have a lot of power in their mystery because not everything is explained.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, he was great.
I quite enjoyed his winding up dialogue with James Roban's Cheyenne character.
Yeah.
They were both quite eccentric characters as
Mm-hmm.
well. What did you think of James Roban? Or Jason
What?
Roban?
Oh,
should I
as
say.
Cheyenne.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I liked him. Didn't he have the great line about the coats? Was that his line?
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, like he had a lot of great lines, and I feel like he had a good like element of sass, which was cool.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
a lot of sass.
Yeah.
And there was more, I felt like the film had a bit more humour and irony than the earlier films.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if The Good, the Bad and Ugly took itself emotionally very seriously,
Mm-hmm.
Once Upon a Time in the West certainly did that, but there were times where it was not as afraid to be funny and strange, and the music often showed that as well, with the kind of with the kind of slightly awkward comic interactions between Cheyenne and Harmonica Man, especially.
Yeah, like like the music kind of changing to be a bit lighter, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
So, 1971 brings us a film known as two different pictures: A Fistful of Dynamite and Duck You Sucker.
Yeah.
This began a phase of Sergio Leone's career where studios began to interfere with his films. At this point, he had not, under any account, wanted to make a Western, and Once Upon a Time in the West was supposed to be his love letter and goodbye. But again, nobody would give him money unless there was a sense of the Wild West. Eventually, he agreed to produce and direct this film. Let's call it Duck You Suckers.
Yeah.
On the provision that he could have lots of creative freedom. And what resulted was a very unusual film. And it is a cross between an action and war movie slash horror film.
Okay.
Almost. It is, and at times satirical and very funny.
Yeah.
I think it's one, probably his darkest films, not the darkest, I feel, but it continues a trajectory of his films becoming more interested in darker themes and featuring more atrocity
Definitely.
and political violence.
Yeah, and kind of questioning political morals.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Duck You Suckers stars Rod Steiger as Juan, illiterate Mexican peasant who lives with his family in an outpost raiding the odd rich traveller. They become embroiled in the Mexican Civil War, set around the early 1910s, perhaps just a little earlier. And Juan is embroiled in that civil war with a new adventurer called John, played by James Coburn. And his character is an IRA terrorist or bomber on the run, having just fought in the Irish War of Independence against the British government, and is seeking redemption in the Mexican Civil War. So At first, the film presents itself as one in which the characters might be working together on a bank heist, with John reluctantly being compelled to help Juan. And there's lots of funny banter and things like that. But eventually, Juan is in fact the one played by John into becoming a kind of unwitting hero of the revolution, despite his every attempt to escape the revolution with as much money as he can. He can't. And eventually, they form a real friendship, but also one that includes great tragedy.
Yeah.
Where Juan's peasant family, whom he says stands a great risk of being killed by this revolution he's becoming compelled to help, actually happens, and of which John feels responsible. John also has a tragic backstory that reveals itself in a series of romantic flashbacks as well.
Yeah.
I think the film in general really makes us question about the inherent dangers of political righteousness and the idea that an ideology on paper can provide every answer to the human condition.
Yeah.
Failed
your
and
own
flawed
kind
as it
of
is.
skeletons in your closet. And yeah.
So I have to ask, what did you think then of Duck You Suckers? What were your general impressions?
I really liked it. Again, it was like heavier, much heavier than the first two and the first three films. But it had lots of comedy, and I feel like that's the best way to kind of like, I guess, with heavy themes, slowly boil your audience like a frog. Like they're kind of unwittingly going into it with all this kind of comedy, because the peasant, what was his name?
Juan?
Juan, yeah. Like Juan, he's so talented and he's got great comic timing. He's hilarious. And it kind of starts very quite lighthearted. But then, just the themes become more and more apparent. It becomes totally tragic, and you're just not expecting that, I think, from. But yeah, that's quite a common thing. It's that Sergio Leone's films tend to start a lot lighter and just become very tragic.
I think interestingly with this film, as opposed to Once Upon a Time in the West, in which the first 12 minutes opens with hardly any dialogue, this starts almost more like a play, where almost like Ford's Stagecoach film from the 30s. Well, it takes place in a stagecoach with dialogue between all the characters.
Right,
and like this, there's a lot of dialogue between these characters.
Yeah, it's like setting the scene, kind of
kind of
giving a lot of
exposition,
important exposition. But I think it's so interesting, like the way they close up on people's mouths and they're like chewing horrible food, and it looks horrific.
And this is a film that really concerns itself with class, doesn't it? You know, who has money, who has wealth, and who pays the price for revolutions, and you know, Juan's words, the people that can't read or write.
Yeah. But it's interesting because, like, I think at that point they make a comment of comparing poor people to animals, but at the same time they're all chewing their food like animals. So it really kind of shows the hypocrisy in that really nicely. But it's just an interesting way to show important exposition by using very creative, unusual shots that also are motivated and say a lot about those characters at the same time.
It's interesting, I think, that Duck You Suckers doesn't have a clear villain. The villain is much more abstract. It's the state. But at the same time, in pop culture today, the state might be the enemy, but you know, the revolutionaries would be the goodies.
Yeah.
To have a story in which both sides perpetrate atrocities against one another.
Kind of plays devil's advocate.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I guess, going by the dialogue of the film, Juan says that his family are the most important thing. That's his country, not this nation or that.
Yeah.
You know, and James Coburn's character of John presents the other argument that, well, it's not just your family, that's your country. You have landlords, you have this, you have that, and you know, in which case Juan explodes to say, yeah, that might be true, but it's only us that die in these revolutions when the people that can read do the talking around fancy tables and whatnot.
Yeah, that's an amazing moment actually when he's talking about the people that can read and the people that can't read. It's really sad.
But you know, for the John character, James Coburn, he listens to Juan, you know, and then kind of lies back and is kind of like he acknowledges a lot of the truth in that statement, whereas some kind of let's say SGW type would get themselves in a twist, arguing the point without stopping and listening to counter arguments or nuance.
Very true.
I mean, the character of John has lived his life as a violent revolutionary, carrying guilt over the deaths and things like that he's been part of, but still a believer because he still marches on as part of that. But even he can like listen to a contrary opinion.
So it's like, if he can listen, why can't anybody else?
Yeah, and that's why his character is also a hero. You know, they're both flawed heroes. You know, Juan is a bandit, John is a terrorist, but they're both underdogs. So we don't have a normal villain. We don't have a Wild West black hat. And the only white hat we have, the closest to that, probably, I guess the character of Dr. Villega, is he's kind of the revolutionary goody, as it were, that we're kind of made to like, that they're kind of working for, Juan and John. He's a family doctor, and he's got lots of lines about helping people and checking if their childbirth's going okay and everything like that. I mean, he's really wonderfully played by Romolo Valle. He's great at getting a sense of empathy across. You know, you kind of like him, but of course, he will betray them. Yeah. But such is the complexity of this film and its ideological messaging that he betrays them under torture, but he's willing to die for the cause and does so in an attempt to redeem himself. Yeah. Whereas, contrary to that, the film shows us the character John living with the guilt of not giving someone a second chance to redeem themselves, even though they still believed in the cause after betraying him, which was the murder of his own friend that we see in these beautiful flashbacks. And then to make things even more complicated, at the very ending, we get the hint of a personal motive that might have pushed him just over the edge to pull the trigger and kill his friend with whatever political justification he had for killing the traitor, as it were, that he might not have had to, and that he might not have done it for the right reasons, that he might have used the ideology of the revolution to do something that was very personal.
Very biased.
Sure, and if you're wondering what that is, you see both the guys kissing the same girl. You know, it's not to say that that's the reason he did it, but that
it could have been the catalyst, even if it wasn't the entire reason.
Yeah, the catalyst, but maybe not catalyst being the cause, but maybe just more like an easy excuse. Yeah. That you could believe in something, but that if you have the power of violence in pursuit of that ideological goal, no matter how noble it is, with that power, it comes great responsibility, and its abuses can become easy, you know, if you have power over life or death. And Ennio Morricone's music was stunning with the Sean Sean theme as well, you know.
What was that again? You have to do a rendition. Yeah, go on, sing it.
Michael does like whistling it often in the restaurant. But yeah, I think a very beautiful, powerful film. One of my favourite scenes is when John witnesses Dr. Viega betraying the other rebels. He sees them at night. He's clearly been tortured. Sitting next to him as an army officer, looks to Dr. Viega and then to the people being brought in front of the truck, lit by the headlights, and then being, once identified, pressed against a wall, group after group after group, until eventually the wall is filled, and then they're all shot. Yeah. And this betrayal and the subsequent execution is intercut with John watching them in the rain, and it cutting into his flashbacks with him and his friend. It's the same thing. With his friend leading, again, his friend, like Dr. Viega, showing signs of torture, being led in with British army officers and police constables to point out in the pub which are the rebels to be arrested. And they're led out one by one, just as we see Dr. Villegas come as being led at one by one to the firing line.
Yeah.
And then it comes to John's character that his friend is about to identify.
Yeah.
And that's when he spins around with the shotgun. And just as before he pulls that trigger, it cuts to all the prisoners on the wall being machine gunned down in front of Dr. Villegas. And then back to just John's face haunted. He's watching what's happened there, but he's also seeing it in his past.
head. Yeah.
It's beautifully edited.
Yeah.
And it's probably one of the most powerful scenes in any of Sergio Leone's films. And your favourite one being the massacre in the Cape. And you just love that.
Why are you trying to make me out to be this like evil tyrant here?
Yeah, I don't think I have to work hard at that.
Rude.
If we look to the final film, Once Upon a Time in America, we are now in 1984. Almost 11 years, or 12, 13 years have passed. He's not made any films. He was only getting Western offers and he was turning them all down. He was working uncredited on a number of other people's films. But finally, everything came together for Once Upon a Time in America. His most ambitious film by far, starring Robert De Niro, James Woods, and Elizabeth McGovern as Deborah. James Woods playing a gangster called Max, and Robert De Niro playing Noodles.
Noodles, I love that name.
This is a film which, a little bit like Godfather 2, although it precedes that film, takes place in different eras. We are with these characters as impoverished children that run about in a street gang trying to survive in 1920s New York, then as young adults in the Prohibition era, of like the late 1920s, and then eventually in the 1970s. It's a haunting story of the rags to riches gangster narrative tradition, but it's one that's rooted in failure and wasted opportunities for life, drug addiction, long periods of arrest, and the frustrated romances and friendships which have been sacrificed in the pursuit of success and ambition, rooted from an anxiety based on poverty and violence.
Yeah.
You
know. That film particularly feels like a novel because, the non-linear narrative is really interesting because first we start with them, when they're kind of like maybe in their 20s or in their 30s, and then it goes to for a long time, when they're children, and then it goes to when they're older, and it's really interesting, and it feels like such a kind of complete journey of like particularly Noodles' life.
So, did you like the film? What did you think of it?
I found it really intense. Like I did really like it, partially because like the eras were amazing. Like seeing like the 20s and like I love the costumes so much. So
the art direction and as a whole in that film is the most ambitious of any of Sergio Leone's films. It captures the era in a way we will never see again because no producer would be crazy enough to attempt it. Without CGI and extensive, and it's like, no.
Yeah, I think every wide shot, it was like, wow, that's incredible. Like they didn't waste a single wide shot. It was all like so elaborate, and so everything looked so perfect to each era that it was in, and so beautiful. The
child actors, including Jennifer Connelly as the young Deborah, were great.
They were, It was quite interesting, we were saying, because to portray the sexuality of such young actors, such young, they were children, basically, I feel like it just wouldn't be done in this era, like nowadays.
In films produced in the 70s, it wasn't common, but it wasn't uncommon to feature partial nudity of underage performers. Films like Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro. I think that has a young...
Is it Jodie Foster?
Young Jodie Foster that plays she's like a 14-year-old prostitute.
Oh wow, yeah.
And and others. You can list them all in the comments below. And these films, generally of the 70s era, were in the United States, especially cynical and grittier. The time was so. They were more unflinching about portraying things that they felt were appropriate reflections of the reality.
Absolutely, rather than idealized.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Younger modern audiences would fail to make a distinction between a filmmaker presenting something and advocating something.
Absolutely.
Because they're idiots.
So,
So of course, kids running about forced to basically live as adults because they didn't have the luxury of being able to live as children. Would engage in anything and everything to make life bearable and interesting.
Yeah, no, it all, I'll admit at first, when Jennifer Connelly shows her butt to the young Robert De Niro, I was like, how old is she? Oh my God. But yeah, the more I kind of thought about it and the more the film went on, and they were living such adult lives because they have had to grow up because they haven't had parents that could let them live as children. It's truthful to their stories. So why would you kind of sugarcoat that? What's the point?
No, you're right. Obviously anything like that has to be done in controlled and very safe circumstances, and it's always it's a big challenge working with young performers, especially to do things like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, these are forms of artistic expression. I think films like Once Upon a Time in America get it right, the balance.
Yeah, it didn't feel necessarily glamorized.
No,
it
or
felt,
fetishistic.
Yeah, exactly. It felt kind of real and gritty. Even when the girl was dancing, but she still felt like a child. She wasn't doing all the moves perfectly, and it wasn't sexual. It felt very immature.
Yeah, and that was it felt more real than what could be done today under the weight of idealized ideological depictions.
Yeah.
And could you imagine Amazon or Netflix daring to let a filmmaker do? It's just no.
I don't think it would happen.
Yeah. So, how did you feel about Robert De Niro's performance and James Woods?
They were fantastic. I think Robert De Niro as the protagonist, the fact that he also has a very controversial rape scene, but he is still
brutal.
Yeah, it's
and Elizabeth McGovern did an exceptional performance in that scene.
She did. Oh my God, it was hard to watch.
and the little part that the chauffeur played added to it, especially when he got out and he was traumatized.
Refuses the money.
Yeah. But Elizabeth McGovern did a fantastic job in that scene.
She did.
The film is truly spectacular how it leads to that moment.
Yeah.
It's all during the course of a very romantic day where our gangster's gone to exceptional lengths to paint the perfect evening.
Yeah, hiring out an entire hotel kind of length just for them.
But in the end, it culminates in a rape that comes about from consensual kissing, but it leads to a rape. Expressing for the characters, for him, his a sense of inability to keep the woman that he loves in his life. She's now going to leave, and at that moment, his inability to express that feeling in a way that isn't associated with control and violence, because that's what he's lived learning as a gangster.
Exactly, it's all he knows.
It's like
I mean, it's not an excuse.
No.
At all.
No, but when that...
It's just tragic.
But his response to weakness is violence and power to regain it.
Yeah.
That's the tragedy of his character,
Yeah.
but it has tragic consequences for her character. In that same day, she explains that she could not really maybe be with him because she doesn't want to be a kept creature of a gangster.
Yeah.
but ultimately that's what she becomes.
Yeah.
And with the worst guy in the world, you know, the last person, you know, that Robert De Niro's character would want her to be with, which is his own
Max.
friend that he has thought was dead, but had actually faked his death in order to come back as more powerful than ever before.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's interesting to see these characters all fall victim to their own different tragedies.
Yeah.
Set against beautiful music, art direction, but unflinching portrayal of violence and sentimentality. And normally those two don't go together, but for Sergio Leone, they always do.
And they contrast really nicely. Like there's never, particularly with this film, all of the action scenes and violence was just so brutal. But then they would be contrasted by very, romantic and beautiful dialogue scenes or just moments.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very strange at the start, the way the nonlinear story structure works. It can lose some people in the first 20 minutes because they might think, where are we? We're here, we're there.
Yeah.
Things, but you know, if you're watching it for the first time, stick with it.
Yeah.
And
you do almost forget when it goes to particularly them first when they were children, that first time that we see them like that. It is such a long kind of, flashback that you start to forget it's ever going to come back and like jump to the future again. But it is a really interesting story.
It's done really elegantly the further it goes on. I think for me, that early on in the film, the scene where you see the young Noodles.
Yeah, Noodles.
He's at the railway station. He gets a ticket from an old train conductor, and he looks like it's like almost like Edwardian. You know, it's like so. And he goes through the doors of a big mural advertising Coney Island's like theme park, and it's all painted like it looks like a Victorian circus poster.
Yeah.
And then he walks back again, and now it's a 1970s kind of modernist design with a big apple, the Big Apple. And it's a guy in a suit at the counter instead of the train guy. Everything looks different, and he's picking up a rental car.
Yeah, what a great transition to be like, I'm leaving, and then to show he's back.
The music is done beautifully in that transition as well. Again, like all those Sergio Leone, Ennio Morricone collaborations, the music is stunning. It's like watching a pictured symphony or a concerto, you know?
Absolutely, it's very like operatic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So folks, we're getting a little short of time now, but and we're certainly not ranking the Sergio Leone films. But do you feel that there's a lot to take in from that film?
No, not at all. Actually, I think they're very, very basic films. There's not a lot going on in them. Obviously not. They are packed with things, and I feel like I want to rewatch them right away so I can soak in more.
We'll cut out that part. We'll just leave in the edit just out, and we'll just fade in a black and white portrait photograph of Sergio Leone with his birthday, and Sergio Leone died at the age of just 60 years old. And he died during the early development of a film that would eventually become a fairly standard Hollywood thriller war movie, Enemy at the Gates. His loss and the frustrations of his career are tragic in that they have prevented us from enjoying many more of his films. The last film, Once Upon a Time in America, that we watched was the 3-hour 50 minutes version, one of the most complete versions, not the 4-hour 10-minute version that premiered recently at Cannes, but certainly not the 2-hour or less theatrical versions that were.
That's so sad.
Yeah. Unfortunately, destroyed the enthusiasm of Sergio Leone, and later a lot of people being very confused by this film and only getting the appreciation it deserved much later. But I think it's right up there as a stunning piece of cinema.
It definitely is. And it's so different from his other films taking it. But then it's only different really because of the era. It actually feels very similar to, say, like Duck You Suckers, in a sense of how they portray violence and the deep heart that is in all of his films, really.
So how does it feel being the only 23-year-old female to have watched all of Sergio Leone's films?
Great.
Well, if you're not cancelling me yet, do tune in for more Channel Hex videos, please like and subscribe, where we'll be having more chats about awesome films, filmmakers, and all kinds of goodies. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for joining me today, Megan Tremethick.
Ah, thank you.